Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, after an extended absence, after holidays and travel and illnesses and all kinds of things, it's good to be back with you here. Happy New Year and happy celebration of our first episode of 2025.
Yeah, happy New Year, happy holidays. I'm glad we all made it out alive and everyone's, healthy and we're here and I'm glad to be doing this again.
And we got a great topic for you with our return. And this is on our Best of the Decade series. We're going to cover 1980s. And, when we did the 1970s, I postulated at the beginning that it is the number one decade without question, without competition, due to all the landmark films that populate the 1970s. But if I was going to make a case for another decade to challenge it, I think it would have to be the 80s. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely one of the best decades for horror. We have the introduction to VCR, right? Great practical effects that really started pushing the limit of things with a lot of slashers. We had a lot of different franchises we started seeing bloom that we still like to this day. Hellraisers and Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Evil Dead. I don't want to say it's like one of the birthplaces of modern horror, but it's certainly one of the golden eras.
It is, and I think the proliferation of home video and digital video recorders, you really had a glut of almost anyone could make a movie. And with that, I think the negative of the 80s is you had thousands and thousands and thousands of titles of garbage.
Yeah.
But within that, you also had some absolutely ingenious, creative minds that flourished. And, like Sam Raimi in the original Evil Dead, you read about how that movie was made and a group of friends, and it's duct tape and whatever you got to do to get something on film. And it's iconic and classic. And that kind of creativity just was able to flourish because of the 80s.
Right. Like when technology becomes cheaper, it lowers the barrier of entry so more people can get in, right? So the technology is cheaper to make things. And when you have limitations, you kind of increase your creativity, right? Like that goes for anything, any medium of creativity. When you limit someone's like how many resources they have to become more creative. And so within that, we'll see a lot of garbage that comes forward because of anyone can do it. A lot more people can do it at low budget. But within that, you'll find a lot of gems. We see the same thing right now with Netflix, right? Like there's new movies and series coming out constantly, like more than we saw 10 years ago. Like it's just a bombardment of it. And a lot of it's just trash, right? But then within that, you'll see a lot of gems pop up. So, I mean, we were kind of seeing that in the 80s.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. We've covered a lot of the great movies from the 80s already in previous shows. The Shining, The Fly, The Thing, Evil Dead, Poltergeist, Reanimator, American Werewolf in London, Hellraiser. You touched on. Near Dark is something I consider a classic vampire movie.
Yeah,
and even things like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Mm-hmm. I consider an 80s movie because it was made in 1986 and it has that 80s sensibility, even though it wasn't released until 1990. To me, that's still an 80s movie and an absolute classic. Sure. The movies we're going to cover tonight kind of continue along that vein in being, real tent poles and real iconic films. And we're going to start with A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, directed by Wes Craven. And, I found it very interesting to go back and rewatch this film. Obviously, I've seen this film probably a dozen times. But looking at it from a different perspective, it really struck me how genuinely creepy and scary this film is. Because, for me, when I think of Nightmare on Elm Street, I think of, smart ass, wisecracking Robert Englund, and this movie's not that.
No, I just want to say this is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I saw it when I was way too young, and the boiler room was in my nightmares as a kid for years. It stuck
Yeah.
with me. I thought, as you get older, and like you said, you kind of rewatch some of these movies, you kind of see how genius some of the decisions they made were. I actually genuinely love the concept of like a dreamscape killer because you can't escape that. I think it's very, very original. We don't see a lot of that. I don't know how many times that was made before this. In literature or film, but to me, I think it's one of the originals. The very concept of Freddy. The movie has a very creepy soundtrack to it. I think it's very iconic, and something that's very interesting in this movie that I never really realized is that he's only in the movie for 7 minutes, which is half the time that Hannibal Lecter's in Silence of the Lambs, right? So
Yeah.
to be that iconic for only being on film for 7 minutes, kind of like increases the suspense of the character as well.
And that's why I will always say this is the best Nightmare on Elm Street, because it's almost like in Jaws. They had malfunctions with Bruce the shark. So the shark was limited in the amount of time it was shown. It was off camera. It was the iconic score from John Williams, and
Yep.
it added to the dread by not seeing it. And I think that's reflected positively here. And with each successive sequel, while I enjoyed them, they're different movies.
Completely.
They're not the shadowy, creepy, real true horror. They're almost horror comedies by the time they're done.
They're absolutely horror comedies, in my opinion. But in this one, you also see you kind of see the internal struggle with that the teenagers are all going through, right? Like you see, like you kind of have like Nancy's conflict of trying to deal with her losing her mind, right? Like they kind of like they have like good character development on that end. It's not the best acting in the world, but they were all very young actors. Johnny
Yeah,
Depp's first movie. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like so, you're kind of seeing them like kind of come into their own as far as the acting. So you kind of excuse that a little bit. But like you said, it's got great musical score that kind of like Jaws, like you said, and it kind of just adds to the tension.
In the classic 1, 2, Freddy's Coming for You, sang by kids, almost with an echo effect added in the background.
Yeah,
It's just super creepy.
yeah,
Like if you heard that, you'd be like, "Oh crap!"
yeah. Well, even when in the beginning when Tina is in the boiler room, you can hear like the screaming of children, right?
Yes,
I thought that was a really creepy effect that they had. It was really good.
yeah, and that's how our movie starts, with Tina running through a dark industrial style building. She's in her nightgown, and we hear different background effects. We hear steam. We hear an evil laugh, a very menacing laugh. We hear children screaming in the distance, and it's all very, very creepy. Freddy is pretty much left in shadow at this point, and she runs, she screams, she wakes with rips in her clothes. And that's our first indication that things that happen in this dream are going to permeate through into life.
Yeah,
And they go to school the next day, and this is where we hear the kids on the sidewalk singing the Freddy song.
yeah,
It's very floaty, surreal, and dreamlike. It's not, where the rest of the movie is kind of, grounded in reality with
yeah.
this
Like
mysterious
mystery.
figure.
Yeah.
Just when they sing that song, it's very, very surreal.
It's very like yeah, almost like you said, it's like hallucinogenic type thing going on.
Yeah, exactly. The next night, Nancy sleeps over because, Tina had problems sleeping, and their boyfriends, Rod and Glenn, show up. And we learn that Nancy had a similar dream. Tina goes to bed with Rod, and she wakes with pebbles bouncing on her window until one crashes through. And she goes to the window and she hears a voice from the shed. And she goes out to investigate, and Freddy emerges, and it's a long shot. He's way back by the shed, and he comes around, and he's shadowed in the street lights or the moonlight, and he's got these impossibly long arms. And you think about the non-reality of dreams, and it to me it was a great representation, because things don't make sense in dreams, and Freddy
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. He can cut off his own finger. You know, he can kind of cut himself and maggots spill out type thing. Like he can kind of just do whatever he wants.
He chases her and attacks, and we cut to Rod waking up in the room, and we see Tina's thrashing around. He rips the covers off, and we just see her skin being sliced by an unseen force
Yep.
and cut up. And there's, it's a really cool effect for 1984.
It's very cool.
And then she is dragged out of bed, up the wall, into the corner of the room, and then dragged across the ceiling, leaving just a bloody smear in her wake before she's unceremoniously just dropped into the
Thrown
middle of the
down,
floor
which I
dead.
thought was an even cooler effect because even when you're watching, you're like, how'd they do that? You know, it's kind of like Tom Savini said, when you're doing special effects, you're really just doing magic,
Mhm.
right? Like it's a magic trick. So it's always cool to like watch that stuff. Like, how did they do that? Like, there's no wires or CG. There's no CGI.
Yeah,
You know, this
right.
is all like practical. Yeah.
I've seen people be on the ceiling effects done by just inverting a room
And just
and
filming it. Yeah.
gluing tables and stuff, or sticking
I
them.
think that's what they did. Yeah.
But this one moves perspective. It goes wall, ceiling, and then drop to the floor, it was really well done.
Yeah.
Of course, the cops blame Rod because his explanation makes no sense. He's the only one in the room with the girl, and she got cut up.
And he left the scene of the crime.
Yes, even though they have no murder weapon, they have no
Fingerprints. They have
evidence
no, right.
other he was there.
It's circumstantial. Yeah.
Nancy falls asleep at school, and she sees Tina's body in a clear body bag, which I thought was an unrealistic representation of a body bag, but a very cool effect to see her through the plastic, almost like crying for help, and then the
Yeah.
bloody bag is just dragged down the hall.
Yeah, you know it's funny when I was parts of this movie like parts like that kind of reminded me of you see like it reminded me of where It Follows got some of its ideas like that like I don't know why I thought of that movie when I watched that scene, but I was like I feel like that person was like whoever who directed It Follows like was kind of like paying homage to some of this.
That's funny because I had the same thought. She's sitting in a classroom looking around,
Yes.
and then the hallway scene is also, yeah, I thought the exact same thought.
Yeah, she's running away with the hall monitor. Yeah.
Yeah. She follows the bag being dragged away and follows it into the basement where Freddie stalks her. And smartly, to get herself out of this dream, she burns her arm on a steam pipe, and she wakes screaming in class, but with a burn on her arm from the steam pipe, which
Yeah.
again, when I first saw this, and again, I was a kid, and it was like, oh, wow. Like,
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because she's freaking out, and as she's leaving, the teacher's like, "Make sure you get a hall pass." Like that's all
yeah.
she cares about. Yeah,
And we've seen in movies before where there's a super creepy or a super haunting scene, and something terrible happens, and then somebody snaps awake, and it's just a dream,
yeah.
and it's kind of diminished, and it's like, okay, well, that was a cool scene, but it really doesn't mean anything.
Right,
This was the first time I was like, oh no, this stuff
This-
matters.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's a way, and that drives me nuts in movies when they do that. It's a way to say, "Hey, we want this cool scene, but it has nothing to do with the plot." Well, we'll just make it a dream scene. Okay, that's just kind of just insert that, and it solves it. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like an excuse. Oh, hey, we thought it was
Put
really great special effect. Let's see if we can stick it in there.
yeah.
She runs home, and at home we have the famous tub scene with the blades in the water that come up between her legs. And again, that rewatching that, I appreciate that scene even more because it defies all logic. There's no, it doesn't make sense, and it
Right.
ties back into dreams don't make sense.
Yeah. How would a hand be able to fit in there? Like, how would a whole body be there?
It's not,
Right.
what's it attached to? It doesn't make sense.
Right. And then
Yeah.
when she starts getting pulled down, there's a whole pool, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a whole ocean. Like she gets pulled into like an ocean. Yeah.
Yep. She finally gets free, and now she's desperate to stay awake. And one of my favorite parts, because I love this kind of thing, in an effort to stay awake, she's watching the original Evil Dead, which I thought was a cool nod.
Yeah.
And in response to that cool nod, in Evil Dead 2, when they're exploring the basement, Freddy's glove is hanging up in the rafters. So these two filmmakers kind of gave
Kind of gave
nods
each other a
back and
nod.
forth to each other,
Yeah.
which I love.
I love seeing that stuff. Yeah.
That night, Glenn sneaks into her room and she asks him to watch her while she sleeps to protect her.
Yeah, he comes up through the window, and I keep watching when when you're watching this movie the whole time, you're thinking, wait a second, Scream just ripped this movie off. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's Wes
I
Craven
know,
ripping
I
off
know,
Wes Craven,
I
so
know, kid.
I guess it's better. She said, just one thing, just one thing you need to do, and that is you have to stay awake and watch me. And of course, he falls asleep. So in her dream, she's being chased, she's being attacked, she's screaming for Glenn. She sees Tina's body. There's a cool scene where Freddy explodes through a mirror and grabs her, and then her alarm goes off, waking her up, which she had wisely set her alarm. And I think Nancy kind of became this iconic final girl because of things like the burn her arm on the pipe, setting her alarm.
Yeah.
Like she
Intelligent. Yeah.
embraced the challenge and was smart about it.
Yeah. And like, even at the end of the movie, the mom's like, it's part of you, part of your personality is facing things. That's what you do.
Yeah. And maybe that comes from, she comes from a family of divorce. Her mother appears to be an alcoholic. So she's tough.
Right. Yeah.
They go to see Rod in jail because this new information just is driving them crazy, and they kind of want to compare stories. And while they're waiting to see him, Rod is sleeping. We see him strangled and hung up by his sheets, just hung by his neck. Nancy describes the Freddy character to her parents, and her dad is the police chief, John Saxon, who reappears in the series.
Yeah.
And you see them kind of look at each other with some acknowledgement that we, the audience, don't yet know what it means.
Right.
Her mom takes her to a sleep clinic, where they're like, "Oh, no problem. We see this kind of thing all the time," and it's like, "No, you don't."
Right.
She wakes from their test screaming. She has cuts on her arms, and she's got Freddy Krueger's fedora in her hand with his name written on the inside.
And the doctor's completely speechless. Like they don't even know how to address it because it's actually a cool scene because he's like, well, it won't go above like 5 or 7 or something like that, and it spikes and starts going as high as possible. He's like, I've never seen it go this high before. Like the kind of like indicating the seriousness of what's going on.
Yeah, and we get the mom want to know how she snuck the hat into the hospital,
Yeah.
right? Because she can't accept what
Even though
Nancy's telling her.
they laid her down, so they knew there was nothing there. Right.
Yeah. So she has an argument with her mom. Finally, her mom relents and tells her about Freddy Krueger. And one thing I noted in the opening credits, Freddy, quote unquote, Freddy became this icon and this character that sold toys and had a kids' TV show and all this stuff. At the opening of the movie, he's credited as Fred Krueger, played by Robert Englund. And I just think that speaks to the serious nature that is applied to this movie that is kind of lost as it gets more cartoonish.
That's true. That's a good point.
That reminded me of, I actually thought of the original Van Halen album from 1978. If you look at the back cover, the singer is credited as Dave Roth. Like that was him before he became the persona of David Lee Roth.
Right.
And it was like, to me, Fred Krueger was this shadowy killer before he became this outlandish Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, right. It's cartoonish Freddy, right. That's a really good point. Yeah.
So her mother finally tells her about Fred, child molester that was set free. Angry vigilante parents trapped him and burned him to death. Apparently none of them suffered any repercussions from this. But Nancy has a new plan.
Which I would have been pissed. I'd be like, wait a second, I've been telling you I've been having nightmares for how long now? And you're just like, you've been telling me I've been crazy? Like, and now you're going to tell me this? Like, what's going on here?
You take me to a sleep clinic instead of, yeah. Right. So Nancy's new plan, back to her bravery, I guess, is she is going to grab him in the dream. She's going to fall asleep. She's going to dream, and she's going to grab Freddy Krueger and pull him out with her Well, Glenn is waiting to take him out with a baseball bat.
Yeah, yeah, with anything. I just want to say one more thing about that. I think a better way to write that in there, instead of the mom telling her that, it would have made more sense if she went down in the basement and she just saw a bunch of newspaper clippings and she started to put it together herself.
Yeah.
Right. And then approached the mom, and the mom was like, well, we didn't, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, it would have
Yeah.
made for her to just be like, like, she should have found out her own. I don't know. That's just me
It
nitpicking.
could have been a more dramatic confrontation too, because she confronts her with this information,
Yeah.
and maybe she
And the
breaks
mom's
down,
drunk, drinking at 11 a.m. And, yeah.
maybe she breaks down sobbing and confesses the
Yeah.
secret that the whole neighborhood had kept. I don't know,
I
but
think that would
that's
have
a
been
good
better
point.
writing. Yeah.
You
Anyways, sorry.
sounds like you're a writer or something, man.
I'm working on some stuff.
I hear you. So that's her new plan. But before Glenn can come over to execute this plan, he falls asleep in his own house. They're trying to wait till their parents go to bed and everything. And her own mom has the house locked down, so Nancy can't get out. So they're separate, and this plan is not going to be executed. And this is where the famous scene where Glenn's in bed sleeping, he's supposed to be going over to Nancy's house, and he is pulled down into his bed, sucked through the mattress, through the middle. And again, very good effect for 1984.
It's still cool to watch now.
And yeah, absolutely. And he dies in an eruption of blood geyser. It's literally 10 humans worth of blood
Yeah.
bursting out of the mattress and spraying across the ceiling.
And like in the next scene, I think when they come there, one of the detectives or something says, "Yeah, the coroner's in the bathroom. He's been throwing up ever since he saw it."
Yeah.
Even the coroner's throwing up.
Which was funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great scene. It's really cool.
It
Really
is.
good effects. So Nancy yells out the window, and her dad comes to the scene of the crime, and she said, "You got to come over in 20 minutes. Come to the house, break in. I need you to come get me in 20 minutes." And then she goes about and sets traps for Freddy. Very, very Home Alone style traps.
I was thinking the same thing.
Years before Home Alone existed, right?
All we needed was that music.
Yeah. And as I'm watching, I'm like, I kind of forgot about the traps part. I'm like, oh my God.
I
this
actually
is
did
Home
too.
Alone.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I forgot about the Home Alone stuff.
So she goes to sleep, confronts Freddy in the boiler room. He chases her. She jumps into like a pile of brush, a pile of shrubs.
Yeah.
He jumps on her and she grabs him, and the alarm goes off. But back in her room, her dad is not there yet. He's still tied up at the scene, and Freddy jumps at her. And she runs, and now Freddy runs into all the traps, Home Alone style. He gets hit in the head, and he gets
With an
knocked down
iron,
the stairs, and yeah.
Steps on a nail.
She manages to trap him in the basement, and burn him. Very, very full circle moment for Fred's existence.
Yeah.
The
He's like,
house.
"Are you serious again?"
Yeah. How many times can I burn? I already look like a cheese pizza that's been set out too long. The house is on fire. The dad runs from across the street, and we see the Freddy attacking the mother while he's still on fire, but burning Freddy sinks into the bed and disappears. And then, so they're like, oh, it's over.
Yeah, it's like he goes into like another dimension. Yeah.
And the dad leaves her in the room. And I'm like,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, he's just like, "I'll be downstairs, honey," and he's like, "Yeah, I'll just be a minute."
Like what we just witnessed, I'm not letting my daughter out of my sight.
We're out of this house. Not only that, we're out of this house. Did you see that bed open up like a portal to another dimension?
Yeah.
Let's get out of here.
Freddy returns, stretching through the fabric in another really, really well done effect, and emerges from the bed. But Nancy was waiting for him the whole time. She knew he was still there. And she kind of turns his power off. She denounces him as nothing. You're a dream. I can wake from it any time. You have no power over me. And you see almost, and this reminded me of the end of It, where the kids are like talking down to the Pennywise, and shrinking it and diminishing its power over them. It's very similar to that in my mind.
It's very symbolic, though, right? Of like not like letting your fear have power over you. You know, it's a powerful statement. There's a lot of like psychology that goes into this movie that we don't have to go over. But Wes Craven's very intelligent when he made this stuff. He knew what he was doing.
Sure. My one complaint about the movie is as she takes all his power away and diminishes his power, Freddy disappears in a very poor electric blue CGI, dots.
Yeah,
which
it's the final scene. Yeah, it's like they did that with the Children of the Corn, right? Like you have all this like cool stuff, and then it's just like some cheesy effects that they add. It's like they didn't have to add that.
Yeah. So that was. I wish they could have done that differently. I would have rather seen him like his clothes dropped to the floor and his hat sitting on top of it.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, they probably could have.
The electric blue just was awful.
Yeah. Some special effects guy was like, "Oh, look at this cool thing we can do. It's really modern. It's really modern." He sold them on it,
Yeah. The next day, all seems well. Nancy's mom is fine. All of her friends are alive again. It's like all this happened in a dream world, which I kind of don't understand because it was sold to us that the dream came through to the real world. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, well, that kind of doesn't really make sense for what we just experienced. But then it kind of does make sense because the mom waves and now she went from being an alcoholic to she's June Cleaver.
Well, yeah, she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna stop drinking now, and like she's like the way she says that's one of the cringiest parts of the movie. I'm like, oh, why is the acting that bad?
Then they get in the car and it's the four kids, and the car locks them into the convertible. The door's all locked, the windows all locked, and the convertible top comes up. And the convertible top is red and green striped like Freddy's sweater design. And as they drive away, and this scene was cool, a hand smashes through the window in the door and grabs the mom and rips her through the opening like super fast, like 10 times.
Yeah,
speed.
like the door is slurping a piece of spaghetti. Just takes her. Yeah.
She's gone, and she wouldn't fit through there.
No, it looked like a mannequin was going through it.
But it was so fast that it gave the effect. It was
cool.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. So Wes Craven actually was against that ending. He didn't want it to be like that. Whereas the car took off and it was Freddy. He kind of just wanted it to end, right? But they insisted that because it implies sequels. Like we can franchise this now.
Oh,
and he was like, no, that wasn't his original vision. He was like, they fought over it. He was like, I don't want it to end like that. Like the whole point was that Freddy was destroyed. Do you know what I mean? Like she's gonna go off and she's the hero, and that's the whole point. And they're like, no, we need a different ending, and they fought over it. And I was reading an article on it, and he was kind of powerless at a certain point. They're like, we're taking it in this direction, dude. Like we're gonna have this ending, and he was like, all right, like,
yeah, that's what happens when you deal with big studios. They get the final say.
Yep.
But yeah, again, I think this movie kind of suffers in historical context because of the sequels, and not all the sequels are bad, but this movie as a standalone, it's dark, it's creepy, it's very influential, and when you're that successful, it becomes a franchise starter. But the limited Freddy exposure adds to the effectiveness of it. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and it came out. It's funny. This movie came out with the same weekend. What was it?
Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Silent Night, Deadly Night. Yeah, and Silent Night, Deadly Night was beating it in the box office, and then it only lasted one weekend. They took it off because of all the controversy, and then that allowed this movie to kind of skyrocket and take off.
Which is a great story. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Yeah.
In the pantheon of horror movies, you certainly put Nightmare on Elm Street above Silent Night, Deadly Night. As much as I enjoy that twisted movie, but
right.
To know that it outdrew it the opening weekend.
It was outdrawn.
Never guessed that. Yeah,
people wanted that Killer Santa.
But definitely one of the best of the 1980s.
100%. Yeah, it's still to this day. I mean, it like you said, it suffers from its time from what it was for the 80s. But to me, it's still one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I mean, it's just so iconic.
Yeah, absolutely. Our second film in the best of the 1980s is Aliens from 1986, directed by James Cameron. And I've heard a lot of discussion that this film is an action sci-fi movie and doesn't fall in the horror category. And I can tell you, I always believe this, and by watching it again, I'm more sure than ever. This is a horror movie.
Yeah, 100%. it's definitely has action elements to it. You could even call it a horror action movie, but it's 100% first and foremost a horror movie. You're dealing with the same exact material you were from the original, right? And they're just kind of transferring it over with new elements added to it, but it's still a horror movie.
Yeah, there are some scenes in this that will leave you on the edge of your seat, and and biting your fingernails. It's creepy. And this movie offers an interesting contrast to the one we just covered in A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that this is more of a big budget studio, polished. But I think,
Blockbuster, yeah.
yeah, I think one thing James Cameron does successfully, and he did this was his follow up after had done Terminator, is he takes all those elements, and it's got great actors, it's got a good polish to it, the film looks great,
Good
but
script. Yeah.
the core of the story stays the same. It's not lost.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this movie so successful, it works so well, I should say, is that James Cameron. It's interesting because he had nothing to do with the original, right? So like it's like 7 years later, and James Cameron comes around. I think him and his wife like wrote the film. They wrote the script, and he also directed it. And he kind of comes in and says, "I want to do something with this," right? And he does it so well. You get two different directors' perspectives, and you get two completely different movies, but it's still the same. You still get that same alien like feel to it. Like there's two types of people really. There's people that think Aliens is the best one, and the original is the best one, right? That's how good the sequel is. And what's interesting to me is that the sequel that's this good comes from a completely different director. I don't know how often we see that. Do you know,
Yeah,
so he took it in a very intelligent way where, he was able to take, they could have just made a remake, right? They could have just, oh, we're going to rehash a bunch of stuff. And he's like, no, no, no. We're going to set the story up in a way where we're going to dive more into Ripley's character,
yeah,
right? And give her like she was nominated for Best Actress for an
yeah,
Oscar for this. Do you know
yeah.
that's how good it was. Like so we kind of like deep dive into her character without trying to do all this like crazy world building and stuff like that. Like we're gonna dive more into the character. And I think they just do a phenomenal job with this movie.
I agree, and I think the fact that that conversation exists with Alien being such a iconic and great film is really a testament to this film that you can even have
Exactly.
that discussion.
Yeah.
But one thing I love about this is James Cameron, although it's a completely different film and different approach to the film, he doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. This story makes continuity sense with the original
Yes.
story. And he's
Yes.
like, what if it took everything that it did well and then went here? And it just fits so well.
Right. I mean, like small things that they did that were very intelligent. She wakes up 57 years later, right? So in the original movie, she's isolated from everything, right? It's an isolation movie. And now because it's 57 years later, she's still isolated in a way in her mind because she doesn't have any family. She doesn't, it's 60 years later. You'd still feel isolated. Like I don't know any of you people. I don't have any family. I don't have any friends. I'm still kind of isolated. So it still kind of creates that isolation in her mind in the character. So we can still continue moving forward with that isolation fact.
And yeah, it's funny you say that because I actually watched the 1990 director's cut version that James Cameron put together,
The
and
three hour one?
it's got no, it's only like 17 minutes longer.
Yeah.
But I always love to see what did the director really intend? What was his artistic vision? That matters to me.
That's the
And
one where she was like a mother and they kind of dive into like how she lost her child and stuff like that.
they don't really they don't dive into it, but 57 years has passed. Her daughter died of old age by the time she
Yeah.
comes back. So
Yeah.
it's touched on, and there's a tragic part of it, and it kind of enforces,
The
when she
relationship that she
yeah,
has with the girl. Yeah.
yeah, when she takes
Rebecca.
on
Yeah.
Newt, that's a real surrogate role that she's stepping into because she lost something.
Yeah.
And it dives a little bit into Newt's history with her family that
That's the
isn't
version I
explored.
watched, by the way, so we can continue
Okay.
talking about that. Yeah.
I kind of kept those notes out because I'm like, well, this isn't the version, but I think it adds a little bit to it, honestly.
And watching this in Blu-ray, by the way, man, James Cameron is something else. He's,
Yeah.
it still looks great.
Yeah, I did the same thing. So as you mentioned, 57 years after Alien, Ripley is found floating in hyperspace or hypersleep. LV 426, the planet that she originally discovered, the face hugger and the chest burster and all the events of Alien, is now colonized. And Ripley is brought into a hearing for destroying the ship that she left on.
I thought it's funny because you have to adjust for inflation, but they're like, that was $42 million ship. And I'm like, 42 million? That
Right.
doesn't even buy you a fighter jet.
Right. It's like Dr. Evil, like, that should be a billion maybe. Yeah, $1 million. Yeah, I thought the same thing. And I said, if we were watching, I said to my wife, it's always funny when you see an old movie, and let's keep in mind this movie is almost 40 years old now, which is incredible. And it's a futuristic movie, and you're looking at like the computer terminals and everything, and you're like,
It's
oh my God,
MS-DOS.
it's
Yeah.
so old looking.
They couldn't foresee GUI, in iPhone and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. At the hearing, Ripley loses her license for operating in space because she blew up their vehicle. And they have no evidence of what she's reporting.
I just want to say one thing. We're talking about technology. What I like about this movie is that they didn't use lasers, right? They're using just regular machine guns. Kind of gives it a more grit feel to it. They didn't try to use like, we're going to use laser guns and all that. They didn't do any of that. I like that.
Yeah. There's a character named Burke who is the corporate sleazebag.
Paul Reiser.
Yeah.
Who always plays the good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's trying to pretend he's everybody's friend. And he sends the colony to investigate Ripley's claim of the fallen ship and what she found there. And we see a man collapse in front of his family, the people who went out to investigate, with a face hugger on him. And part of his family is a little girl, Rebecca, who we come to know as Newt. So they lose communication with the base, and Burke convinces Ripley to go back as an advisor to the Colonial Marine Squad that he's sending out to check it out. And she originally says no, but she finally agrees for two reasons. One, she can't stop having nightmares. Every time she closes her eyes, almost very reminiscent of Nightmare on Elm Street. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees a chest burster emerging from her.
Yeah.
And she also wants to get reinstated because right now she's kind of doing a menial loading dock job. Not menial, but with the experience she has.
She was a flight officer, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a little menial
difference
to her.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but that's actually a problem I have. It doesn't have, when she gets introduced to this unit of Marines, at no point does anyone says, hey, she was an officer. Like they kind of all mock her, and like she kind of steps up and says, here's the game plan, and they're like, whatever. And at no point do they ever say, you're talking to an ex-officer. They would have had way more respect. Like that should have been addressed. I don't know why.
But she wasn't military. She, if you go to the original movie, it was a scavenger ship. There wasn't a military operation, so she doesn't have any ranking with them per se.
True. But still, they should have told her credentials.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Should have given her a little respect, but she earns it before it's over.
She earns it. Yeah. I mean, it's a minor detail I'm picking at, but that's what I do. I pick it.
I got you. And when she only agrees to go if eradication is the goal, not studying, not bringing samples back. And of course, Burke is going to tell her whatever he needs to tell her to get her to go. But we quickly get the feeling this guy is a slime ball.
Yeah.
So they wake from the hypersleep, and we meet the crew of the military. There's typical military banter,
bravado, macho talk.
Yeah. There's a little bit of character building there as they travel, but not a lot. Just enough to glimpse a few characters. She has an encounter with Lance Henriksen, who I love as an actor, and she tells him how she doesn't trust synthetics. He's an android, and based on her experience on the first trip. So they have a cold start to their relationship for sure. But they arrive at their destination. They arrive at LV 426, and the compound that had been occupied is is damaged. It's abandoned. It looks chaos, madness. Things are broke, and they finally discover an acid hole burnt through many, many layers of metal, which matches Ripley's story.
Yeah.
They go into the lab and they find tanks in the lab with alien creatures in it. A couple of them are still alive.
Yeah. Like they were testing on them, like tubes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Motion detectors detect something and they start tracking it and discover a little girl. So, and that's how we first meet Newt. She's
Rebecca,
basically
yeah,
very quiet, has been hiding out on her own this whole time.
traumatized little kid.
Yeah, for sure. Exploring, they find what we've come to know as biomechanical laced tunnels. You see all this, H.R. Geiger designed, is that a vent? Is that a pipe, or is that an arm of something? It's
Yeah, the brilliant design that they have.
yeah, where you can take one of these alien creatures and they can almost move against the wall and blend in. It's
Yeah,
very cleverly done.
very.
And they find wet secretions. They find humans entombed in these walls with these wet secretions, and they find open pods. And we know what that means. And I again, I love how James Cameron made a different movie, but the lore and the
lore
and the
he kept
mythology
everything.
that was built by um, Ridley Scott,
Yeah,
he just takes it and runs with it.
yeah, and you could tell he was a fan when he saw it, and you could tell that he was like, "Man, I really want to do something with this material," and he knocks it out the park.
And we see a chest burster come skittering towards the crew, and this is just the military guys right now, and everybody else is watching from the ship from the
Computers, yeah,
um they did one of these drive up vehicles, like an
and a
ATV.
Cybertruck.
Yeah. So what it looks like. I wonder if that's where he got the idea.
Oh, it's for
Uh,
sure.
a larger alien creature starts moving in. One emerges camouflaged from the wall, which was, again, I thought that was it's a little thing, but it was just brilliant. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, we're never safe. So the crew is being overrun. They have flamethrowers and they're fighting back, but they're being overrun. When they use their machine guns, they're getting sprayed with the acid blood.
yep,
We are quickly reminded that these creatures are just an apex killer with so
yep.
many ways to hurt you.
Which we find out later in Prometheus, if you watch that they were genetically made to be perfect hunters and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ripley, due to inactivity by the young, embarrassingly inexperienced leader of this military crew, the crew itself is good. Who the person that was put in charge is a clown. Due to inaction by him, the team is being overrun, and they're all about to die. But Ripley takes that Cybertruck and just fires it up and drives straight into the tunnel, crashing through and rescuing the team. And it's a scene of death and gunfire and acid spraying mayhem. And you understand why this is referred to as an action movie, but there's way too many creepy parts for me to just call it an action movie.
It's a horror film. It has lots of action elements to it, but it's a horror film.
Yeah. They make the decision, at Ripley's suggestion, to nuke the installation. They're going to go back to their main ship, be in orbit,
Go to orbit. Yeah.
and they're going to nuke the place. Despite protests from the corporate tool Burke,
Yeah.
Paul Reiser, but we discover that an alien has infiltrated their shuttlecraft and crashes it. So they have no way back to the ship and no way to orbit. Forced with no other option, they return to the abandoned settlement and try to secure their location. They put up motion sensor sentry guns. They try to lock themselves basically in, waiting for help.
Yeah, I think they have 17 days they have to wait. And like Hudson's freaking out and he's like 17 days and Ripley's kind of like, yeah, well, this little girl survived this long. We'll be fine.
Yeah,
Get a hold of
on her
yourself.
own.
Let's get schematics. Let's figure this out like professionals.
And at this point, Ripley has despite her, you know, role, she has completely taken charge, and everybody's
Yeah.
listening to her.
She's commanded respect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. She saved him, and she took action where others didn't. So you earn
Yeah.
that respect.
Without having to yell at anyone, just she did what had to get done. Yeah.
We see Ripley put Newt into bed in one of the bunks in like the lab area. It could be like an infirmary, but there's a bed in there, and
Yeah. It's keeping her safe.
she
Yeah.
tucks her in and she talks to her, and it's a very touching moment. You really see that mother inside of her really want to protect this young girl. And it's really well played by both.
It's a very good moment. Yeah.
Um, Burke, she goes and confronts Burke about trying to keep the specimens in the tank and bring them back, because Bishop, the android, told her that. She said, where are they? And he's like, oh, Burke wants us to bring them back. And it's not what she agreed to. So she goes and flips out on Burke. So she goes back to Newt, and they are attacked by face huggers. And you assume it's the ones that they had in captivity. And Burke shuts off the monitors so no one can see them struggling and screaming for help.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, this bastard.
This guy's that dirtbag. Yeah.
Ripley, always smart and clever, sets off the fire alarm, which brings the teams running. They crash into they're in a sealed room.
Yeah, she can't break the glass. Yeah.
Yeah, they crash through they have guns. They shoot their way through, and they help her, save her, and they kill both of the face huggers. Now the power goes out, and a swarm of aliens start coming through the ceiling. And it's cool because they use these, and they really look old-fashioned now, but they use these trackers. And at several points in the movie, they can see something coming on the tracker, but you can't see it. And the aliens end up approaching from above or below on different levels of this structure, so they can detect them, but you can't see them. And that's very creepy moments. They do a good job building tension.
Yeah. Yeah, that like the third act of this movie, as it moves in, all of these sequences were done brilliantly.
Burke leaves and seals them all in. Again, he just keeps sinking lower and lower and lower.
Yeah.
And
the whole time he does it with a smile on his face too. It's not like he's like this evil, like on the outside exterior, like character. He's kind of like, hey, like the whole time. You know, like Paul Reiser does a good job with it.
Yeah, I think that makes him more evil, really.
Right. The whole time he's
not,
trying to negotiate the whole time. Come on, we're gonna get rich. We're gonna get rich.
He's not rubbing his hands, cackling in the corner.
Yeah, he's using logic and ration. Like, yeah.
But yeah, that makes him just the worst lowlife.
Yeah.
Hudson, who is played by the great Bill Paxton.
Yes.
And he ends up getting pulled through the floor. And Burke, who got away and sealed everybody else in, ends up cornered by an alien and killed. And it's like, that was the one scene in the whole movie where you're rooting for the alien.
Don't do what aliens do.
Yeah, don't let this weasel get away. If anybody needs to go, it's him.
Yeah.
The remaining group escape into the vents, led by Newt, who tells him that that's how she survived. That's how she moved around and traveled, because the vents are tight and don't necessarily fit, a full-sized alien.
Right, wouldn't be able to get in there.
As they're all getting away, they're being chased, and Gorman and Vasquez stop and blow up. They blow up themselves and a big group of aliens rather than be captured and incubated. And they've seen what this process is.
What can happen? Yeah.
The biological process is the pods grow the face hugger, which incapacitates a human and plants an egg. The chest burster comes through, grows into a full-size alien. Rinse and repeat.
Right.
So
who wants to do that?
They don't want to be, the incubators who give birth to a new alien.
Right. They'll go out guns blazing.
I totally agree with that.
I would too.
Through all the chaos, Newt is gone, and Ripley finally locates her through this metal grate, and she can see her, but she can't get to her. And there's a great shot of poor little Newt in the water and she's calling out to Ripley, and out of the water emerges a full-size alien. It comes up behind her, and it's towering over her, and it's like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's so many good shots in this movie. Like I said, James Cameron, this is one of his best movies.
it definitely is. And the large alien takes her. So Hicks and Ripley, um, they make it to Bishop. Bishop has gone outside to remote fly in the other shuttle ship. He's the only one capable of doing it. So even though she doesn't trust a synthetic, he goes out there and he's running the remote laptop, and he's got this shuttle ship coming in to get him out of there, get him back to orbit, and resume the plan of nuking the whole planet. They make it to Bishop, and the ship is arriving, but Ripley will not leave without Newt.
Right.
And this is a cool scene. This is an action-packed scene, although it still has very horrific elements. But she basically gears up and heads in alone with only 15 minutes until the place is going to blow. She locates Newt's tracker. She's following it, and she has to go down, 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 down. She's like 15 floors down, and she finds the tracker, but the girl is not with it. It's just loose sitting on the ground. But the girl is close. She hears her yelling and finds her She woke up against a wall, entombed in the goo.
Yeah. It's covered in slime. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're in the middle of a huge group of pods. And you know what her destiny was, that one of the pods was going to come and face hug her.
Yeah. And I think the eggs start to open.
Yeah, the eggs are opening, and we see this amazing scene in the middle of all these pods. We see the giant queen. They talked about this as like an insect colony.
Yeah.
And we see the giant queen is hooked to like this secondary biomechanical apparatus that has like this long elephant trunk tube where it's just depositing pods.
Yeah. Just dropping them off.
And it's like, we saw the pods in the first one. We saw the pods, a field of pods. How did they get there? And this added to the lore in such a way. I was just like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, they could basically, think about how short of a time they've done this. They could infiltrate a planet within a month, 2 months, 3 months. They could just infest. They could infest the universe. That's the problem.
Absolutely. So the huggers start to emerge and come for them, and Ripley starts burning them. And there's this moment where there's like a connection between her and the queen, and she's holding the flamethrower at the pods, which are basically eggs to the queen. And there's like this threat of burning them if the queen doesn't call off the face huggers.
Yeah.
So the face huggers kind of back up a little bit, give them a little space. And then as she backs away, she fires it up anyways and starts burning all the pods.
Yeah. She just gets them anyways.
And there's this great, which in hindsight, the place is going to blow in a few minutes. She knows this. The queen doesn't know this.
Right.
I'm not sure the reason for inciting the wrath of the queen at this point. Get out and let her blow up.
Yeah, because what did they say? It was a 40 megaton nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
And I had to look up the biggest explosion of all time. It's a 50 megaton. So the biggest nuclear explosion ever detonated was 1961. It was a 50 megaton. So 40 megaton would decimate this place. Decimate it. Like, that's huge.
Yeah. So the queen does this awesome scream, which fits it's a unique scream. It fits into the biomechanical idea of these creatures, and detaches herself from this egg-laying section, and she's on the move. Yeah. And the big girl can dance. Let me tell you, she's moving.
Yeah, it turns into one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time.
She gives chase, and Ripley and Newt make it back up to the platform, but the ship is gone. And we know Ripley doesn't trust synthetics, and she's cursing Bishop and I can't, thinking she was abandoned. But in the midst of everything collapsing and burning, Bishop returns with the ship, and he says, "Hope you didn't think I left you, but the platform became too unstable."
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, he's 100%. He's good.
Yeah, yeah. He has that line. I may be a synthetic, but I'm not stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's good. And I love Lance Henriksen. One of the cool things
He's
about
one of the best. Yeah.
one of the cool things about this movie is is he goes on to do Near Dark with Bill Paxton
Paxton. Yeah.
and
Love that movie.
with the woman who played Vasquez. Like
Oh, that's right.
they had just finished this movie, and I believe James Cameron was dating uh, the director of Near Dark,
Oh, wow.
and said she's like, I'm looking for this crew, and he's like, I got these guys,
I got they
and
they have chemistry.
they've
Yeah.
already bonded, and
Yeah.
they just rolled right in, and we know how great that movie is. So
Yeah, that's really cool.
watching this back, I was thinking about, and it's Catherine Bigelow was the director of Near Dark. And it was
Yeah.
like it was just so cool how they rolled from these roles into completely different roles, but that family bond was there.
Like, it makes me want to go watch that movie again after watching Aliens.
Yeah, right. So Bishop returns just in time to whisk them away, and we see the Queen giving chase, but they make it on the ship, and they get away, and they fly off, and the colony blows up behind them, and it's a huge explosion. We think, well, that's the end of that. It's
Yeah.
like the Death Star blowing up. It's
Yeah,
over.
yeah, yeah.
They arrive back at the main ship, and they all get off, and Bishop, who we mistrusted at the beginning because of the first movie, and we've really grown to like, we see him impaled, and he's got that really cool milky substance.
Milky,
that's
yeah, the milky
synthetic bleed.
substance. Yeah.
That's just
He's
look
cut in
weird and
half.
creepy, even though it's just white, but it's cool.
It's just some kind of coolant that they need. Yeah.
The tail of the Queen goes right through him and rips him in half. And she apparently attached to the bottom of the ship in the landing gear and flew off with them. So it's not over.
Yeah.
Newt runs and hide, and Ripley gets into the exoskeleton cargo loader, which is one of the cooler mechanical devices you will ever see. It's basically like a human forklift, and she turns into a transformer.
Pretty much, yeah, yeah.
And they
What she say? Get away from her, you bitch.
Yep. Yeah, famously. And her delivery's perfect.
Yeah.
And they fight. And there's, huge swooping, bashes with the forklift arm.
Grabbing her by the neck and stuff like that. And the mouth is coming out to chomp right in front of her face.
Yeah, little mouth comes flapping in, and they're battling.
It's a wrestling match. It's WrestleMania. Yeah.
It's crazy. And they both get knocked into this trap door, and the trap door goes to the outside. The outside door is opened and creates this big suction. And we see, Newt's now screaming, she's hanging on. We get half of Bishop, his upper half is just flailing around, blowing in the breeze. And they're still battling. The Queen is holding on to Ripley. Ripley's holding on, trying not to get sucked through. And finally, the Queen gets sucked through the door, tumbling into space. And Bishop, the half of Bishop, manages to grab Newt as the wind is sucking her by. He grabs her and saves her from falling in the hole. And Ripley manages to get the door shut.
Yeah.
And the movie ends by Ripley putting Hicks, who was injured, herself, Newt, and even the half of Bishop. She packs them all up.
She packs them in, yeah.
And puts all the humans into hypersleep and heads back home. And it's just a great movie.
It's incredible. It's one of the best. It's one of the best movies ever made. It has to be up there in the top 100.
And I think the ending is so iconic with the battle and the exoskeleton. Alien 3 got so much hate because they opened the movie by, and we talked about what James Cameron did by continuing a coherent storyline with the great movie that came before.
Right, psychologically and through the story, right?
Alien 3 opens with Hicks is dead. Newt is dead. Bishop's gone. Or maybe the Bishop's not gone. But Hicks and Newt are dead and gone with almost no explanation.
Yeah.
And
Just written off.
That created so much hate and vitriol to the movie before it even got going. I don't hate Alien 3. And I actually, David Fincher, who's a great director in his own right, hated what the studio did to it. His director's cut is actually a far more coherent, and it's a decent movie. It can never live up to the first two. And the fact that they took these characters that we built to love and just wrote them off without explanation was hard to swallow.
Yeah, anytime you do that in any series, it's going to be hard to swallow. So that's the nature of what you're doing. I don't care how good your movie's going to be. We developed a relationship with these characters and the story and the timeline, and just removing that automatically dismisses a lot of what you're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a cop out. It's like when Annie Wilkes describes the serials where the guy goes off the cliff in the car and you wait till next week and then they show him he rolled out before.
Yeah.
And she says he didn't get out of the cock-a-doodle car. It's like a cheat. And this feels the same for Alien 3.
For Alien 3, yeah.
But
I'll still watch Alien 3.
And it's funny we're talking about this movie in 2025, because we got Alien Romulus last year, which is a very good entry. Doesn't reach the level of the original two.
No, it's good. I have my issues with it, but it's good. I watched it in the theaters. I enjoyed it.
And this summer we have Alien Earth, a highly anticipated TV series that I'm going to watch, and I'm
going to watch. Yeah, I'm not even going to watch a trailer. I'm just going to watch it.
Yeah. So again, best of 1980s. I think we hit two very diverse movies.
Yeah.
Considering we had covered many of the great films of 1980s,
we covered a lot of
already.
Them.
We were left with two 5-star movies left to cover. So it was
great. So it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's our show for this week. We appreciate you watching, listening, however you find us. We'll be back next week with two more films from another topic. We're the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your Weekly Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.